The bullet grazed so close to Tessa Turner's cheek that she felt the heat of it before she heard the gunshot. And in that split second between death and survival, she decided she was done running from her past. She threw herself behind the overturned wagon in the middle of Las Cruces's dusty Main Street, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. The New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on this September day in 1882, turning the ground into something that could burn through boot leather if you stood still too long. 3 more shots rang out, splintering the wood above her head, and Tessa pressed herself lower, her hand instinctively reaching for the small derringer she kept strapped to her thigh beneath her travel-worn skirts. She had come to Las Cruces hoping to disappear, to become just another face in a frontier town where people minded their own business. But apparently, her former employer had longer arms than she had given him credit for. The man shooting at her from across the street was definitely one of Vincent Mallory's hired guns. She recognized the expensive cut of his coat, the kind of quality that marked him as someone from back east, from Boston, from the life she had fled 6 months ago. "Miss Turner, you need to come with me," the man called out, his voice surprisingly cultured for someone currently trying to kill her. "Mr. Mallory just wants his property back. No need for anyone to get hurt." Tessa's blood ran cold at the word property. That was what Vincent had called the incriminating ledgers she had stolen, the ones that detailed every crooked business deal, every bribe, every life he had ruined in his climb to power. But she knew he meant more than just the ledgers. Vincent Mallory was a man who believed he owned whatever he paid for, including the women who worked as bookkeepers in his offices. She was trying to figure out her next move when she heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked, much closer than the shooter across the street. "That is about enough of that," a male voice drawled from somewhere to her left. The accent was pure Texas, slow and steady as molasses, with an underlying edge of steel that suggested its owner was not a man to be trifled with. "I do not take kindly to men shooting at women in my town." Tessa risked a glance around the edge of the wagon. A tall figure had emerged from the sheriff's office, and even in her panicked state, she could not help but notice the way he carried himself. The man wore typical cowboy attire, dusty boots, worn denim pants, a dark vest over a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. A sheriff's star glinted on his chest, catching the harsh sunlight. But it was his face that arrested her attention. Strong-jawed, with dark hair that fell just past his collar beneath a well-worn Stetson, and eyes that, even from this distance, she could see were an unusual shade of pale blue, almost gray. "This is none of your concern, Sheriff," Mallory's man called back. "This is a private matter between Mr. Mallory and his former employee. The minute you started shooting up my street, it became my concern." The sheriff's voice had not risen in volume, but somehow it carried clearly across the space between them. "Now, you have got 2 choices. You can put down that gun and ride out of Las Cruces, or you can face me. And I promise you, friend, you do not want to face me." There was a long, tense moment where Tessa was certain the hired gun would choose to fight. She could see him calculating his odds, weighing the cost of failure against the cost of returning to Boston empty-handed. Then, apparently deciding that living was preferable to either option, he slowly lowered his weapon. "Mr. Mallory will hear about this," he said. "I am sure he will," the sheriff replied calmly. "You tell Mr. Mallory that if he wants to conduct business in Las Cruces, he can come talk to me personally. Now get on your horse and ride. If I see you in this town again, I will not be so hospitable." Tessa watched as the hired gun holstered his weapon. mounted a fine bay horse that was tied up outside the general store, and rode out of town at a measured pace that suggested he was maintaining his dignity despite the circumstances. Only when he had disappeared from view did she allow herself to breathe properly. The sheriff walked over to where she still crouched behind the wagon, and up close, she could see the lines around his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting into the sun. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, with a few days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw and those startling pale eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable with. He extended a hand to help her up. "Sheriff Carter Jameson," he said. "And you have got about 10 seconds to convince me why I should not throw you in a cell for disturbing the peace." Tessa took his hand, feeling the calloused strength in his grip as he pulled her to her feet with easy strength. "I did not disturb anything," she said, brushing dust from her dark green traveling dress. "That man started shooting at me." "And why would he do that?" Carter asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. She met his gaze steadily, even though her heart was still racing. "Because I took something that did not belong to me. So you are a thief." "I prefer to think of myself as someone who retrieved evidence of criminal activity," Tessa said, lifting her chin. "Vincent Mallory has been running illegal operations in Boston for years. Extortion, bribery, fraud. I worked for him as a bookkeeper, and when I discovered what he was doing, I took the ledgers that proved it." Carter studied her for a long moment, and Tessa found herself unable to look away from those pale eyes. Finally, he said, "Why not go to the authorities in Boston?" Tessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Half the police force is on his payroll. The district attorney golfs with him every Sunday. Vincent Mallory owns Boston, Sheriff. Going to the authorities would have been the same as signing my own death warrant. So you ran." "So I ran," she agreed. "I have been moving west for 6 months, trying to stay ahead of his men. I thought maybe in a town like Las Cruces, far enough from civilization, I could finally stop running." "And how is that working out for you?" Carter asked dryly. Despite everything, Tessa felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "Not as well as I had hoped." Carter was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Come on. Let us get you somewhere safe while I figure out what to do with you." He led her toward the sheriff's office, a modest adobe building that stayed blessedly cool even in the punishing heat. Inside, the office was sparse but functional. A desk covered in papers, a gun rack on one wall, 2 cells in the back with iron bars, and a pot-bellied stove that was currently unlit. Carter gestured for her to sit in one of the wooden chairs facing his desk, while he poured her a cup of water from a clay jug. Tessa drank gratefully, only then realizing how parched she was. When she lowered the cup, she found Carter watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You look like you have had a rough time of it," he observed. Tessa glanced down at herself, seeing what he must see. A dress that had once been fine but was now stained with travel dirt, boots that were worn through at the soles, hair that had escaped its pins to hang in untidy wisps around her face. She probably looked like exactly what she was, a woman on the run with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and a stolen set of ledgers. "I have had better days," she admitted. Carter leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. "So what is your plan?" "Keep running until Mallory's men catch up with you, because they will eventually. Men like that always do." "I know," Tessa said quietly, "but I do not see what choice I have. If I stay anywhere too long, they find me. If I go back to Boston, I am dead. And without those ledgers getting into the right hands, Vincent Mallory will keep destroying lives." "You could send them to a newspaper," Carter suggested. "One that is not in Boston. I have tried. Twice. Both times the packages disappeared before they reached their destination. Mallory has people everywhere, Sheriff. He has connections I never even knew about until I crossed him. Carter was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Finally, he said, "How old are you, Miss Turner?" 24, she replied, wondering where he was going with this. 24 years old, and you stole evidence from one of the most powerful men in Boston, then ran halfway across the country with nothing but your wits to keep you alive. Carter shook his head slowly. Either you are incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Probably both, Tessa said. My mother always said I had more courage than sense. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Tessa looked away, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. She died 3 years ago, consumption. I went to work for Mallory because I needed the money to pay her medical bills. By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, it was too late. Too late how? Carter asked gently. Tessa hesitated, then decided that if she was going to trust anyone, it might as well be the man who had just saved her life. He started paying me extra attention, expensive gifts, invitations to private dinners. I was young and stupid enough to think he might actually care about me, that maybe his intentions were honorable. But then one night, after a company function, he tried to force himself on me. Carter's expression darkened, and his hands clenched into fists. Did he succeed? No, Tessa said quickly. I fought him off, broke a very expensive whiskey decanter over his head and ran. But that was when I knew I had to get out. And I figured if I was going to leave anyway, I might as well take something that could hurt him the way he had hurt so many others. So you took the ledgers. So I took the ledgers, Tessa confirmed. 3 volumes worth of evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life if anyone would actually prosecute him. Carter pushed away from the desk and began pacing the small office, his boots making soft sounds on the packed earth floor. Tessa watched him, trying to gauge what he was thinking. His face was hard to read, all sharp angles and careful control, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept drifting to the gun at his hip. Finally, he stopped pacing and turned to face her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. Did you do anything else besides take those ledgers? Anything that would make you actually guilty of a crime? Tessa considered the question carefully. I suppose technically, I committed theft by taking the ledgers. And I forged a letter of reference when I left Boston so I could get work along the way. But I never stole money, if that is what you are asking, and I never hurt anyone. Carter nodded slowly. All right, here is what we are going to do. You are going to stay in Las Cruces, at least for a while. I will put the word out that anyone who comes looking for you will have to answer to me. And in the meantime, we are going to figure out a way to get those ledgers to someone who can actually do something with them. Tessa stared at him in disbelief. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Because I know men like Vincent Mallory, Carter said, his voice suddenly hard. I know what they do to people, how they use their power and money to crush anyone who gets in their way. And I am tired of watching them get away with it. There was something in his tone, some old pain that resonated with her own. You sound like you are speaking from experience, she said softly. Carter's jaw tightened. My father owned a ranch in Texas. Good land, good cattle, everything honest and above board. Then a railroad company decided they wanted to build through his property. When he would not sell, they trumped up charges, bribed the local judge, and took the land anyway. My father fought them in court for 2 years, spent every penny he had on lawyers. In the end, the stress killed him. Heart attack at 52 years old. I am sorry, Tessa said, meaning it. So am I, Carter replied. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to stand up to men like that, I would take it. So yes, Miss Turner, I am going to help you, because somebody needs to." Tessa felt something tighten in her chest, a strange mixture of gratitude and something else she was not quite ready to name. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter gave her a small smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face from handsome to something close to beautiful. "Do not thank me yet. We still have to figure out how to keep you alive long enough to make this work." Over the next few days, Tessa found herself settling into an unexpected routine in Las Cruces. Carter arranged for her to stay at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez, a formidable woman in her 50s who asked no questions and made it clear that any man who bothered her boarders would answer to her personally. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dusty street. Carter stopped by every morning to check on her, and Tessa found herself looking forward to those visits more than she probably should. He would tip his hat and ask how she had slept, if she needed anything, if she had seen anyone suspicious hanging around. And sometimes, if he had a few extra minutes, he would sit on the porch of the boarding house and tell her about Las Cruces, about the people who lived there and the way the town was growing. She learned that Carter had been sheriff for 3 years, ever since the previous sheriff had retired and moved back east. He had come to New Mexico from Texas after his father died, looking for a fresh start and a place where he could make a difference. The people of Las Cruces respected him. She could see that in the way they greeted him on the street, in the way even the roughest cowboys in town gave him a wide berth. But she also learned that Carter kept himself apart from most people, maintaining a professional distance, even with those who clearly wanted to be his friends. He lived alone in a small house behind the sheriff's office, did his own cooking and cleaning, and seemed to have no interest in the young women who made excuses to walk past his office multiple times a day. "Why do you not court anyone?" Tessa asked him one morning, about a week after she had arrived in Las Cruces. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the town wake up. "I have seen the way women look at you." Carter gave her a sidelong glance, something unreadable in those pale eyes. "Same reason you have not remarried, I would guess." "I have never been married," Tessa said, confused. "Exactly my point." Carter leaned back in his chair, tipping it onto 2 legs. "Some of us are not cut out for that kind of life. Too much baggage, too many scars." Tessa thought about that for a moment. "Is that what you think you are? Damaged?" "I think I am a man who has seen enough of the world to know that happily ever after is mostly fairy tales," Carter replied. "I think I am better off alone." "That sounds lonely," Tessa observed. "Lonely is safer than heartbroken," Carter said, and there was something in his voice that made Tessa wonder what had happened to him beyond just his father's death. Before she could ask, a young boy came running up the street, his face red with exertion. "Sheriff Jameson, Sheriff Jameson." "There is trouble at the Silver Dollar." Carter was on his feet immediately, his hand going to his gun. "What kind of trouble, Billy?" 3 men, strangers, asking questions about a woman from back east. "They are showing a picture around, offering money for information." Tessa felt her blood run cold. Carter glanced at her, his expression grim, then looked back at the boy. "Go find Deputy Martinez, tell him to meet me at the Silver Dollar, and Billy, do not say anything to those men about Miss Turner here. You understand?" The boy nodded seriously, then ran off. Carter turned to Tessa. "Go inside, lock your door, do not come out until I come get you." "Carter, I should not let you face this alone. This is my problem, not yours." "It became my problem the minute I decided to help you," Carter said firmly. "Now go, please." The please did it. Tessa nodded and hurried inside, though her every instinct screamed at her to run. She went to her room and locked the door as instructed, then sat on the edge of her bed, trying not to imagine what might be happening at the Silver Dollar. It felt like hours before she heard Carter's distinctive footsteps on the stairs. She jumped up and unlocked the door, pulling it open to find him standing there. He looked tired, and there was a bruise forming on his left cheekbone, but he was otherwise unharmed. "What happened?" she demanded. "They are gone," Carter said. "For now. But Tessa, we need to talk." She noticed his use of her first name but decided not to comment on it. Instead, she stepped back to let him into her room, not caring what Mrs. Gonzalez might think about the impropriety. Carter took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it standing on end. "There were 3 of them," he said. "Professional gunmen, the kind that Mallory could afford. They had a photograph of you, a good one. Recent." "From the company function," Tessa said, her stomach sinking. "Vincent had a photographer there. I remember posing for a picture. They were offering $200 for information about where you are," Carter continued. "That is a lot of money in a town like this, enough to tempt people who might otherwise mind their own business. So what do we do?" Tessa asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "I ran them out of town," Carter said. "Made it very clear that anyone who bothered you would have to answer to me. But Tessa, the problem is that Mallory knows you are here now, or at least he knows you are in this area. He is going to keep sending men until one of them succeeds." "Then I need to leave," Tessa said, even though the thought made her chest ache. "I will not put you or this town in danger because of me. Or," Carter said slowly, "we could end this." "How?" Carter reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded telegram. "While those men were at the Silver Dollar, I went to the telegraph office. I sent a message to an old friend of mine, a U.S. Marshal named Tom Brady. He is based out of Santa Fe, and he is one of the few lawmen I know who cannot be bought. If we can get those ledgers to him, he can start building a case against Mallory." Tessa felt a flicker of hope. "You think he would actually prosecute?" "Tom Brady does not care how rich or powerful someone is," Carter said. "If they are breaking the law, he will go after them. But we would need to get the ledgers to him safely, which means either he comes here or we go to Santa Fe." "Santa Fe is too far," Tessa said immediately. "If Mallory has men in this area, they will be watching the roads. We would never make it." "Then we get Brady to come here," Carter said. "He owes me a favor, a big one. If I ask, he will come." Tessa looked at him, this man who had inserted himself into her problems without hesitation, who was risking his life and his position to help a woman he barely knew. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? It cannot just be because of what happened to your father." Carter was quiet for a long moment, and Tessa could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "Can I tell you something? Something I have not told anyone else?" "Of course." He sat down heavily on the chair by her window, his hat dangling from his fingers. "After my father died, I was angry. Angrier than I have ever been in my life. I wanted revenge, wanted to hurt the people who had hurt him. So I tracked down the man who had bribed the judge, a railroad executive named Harrison Cole. Found him in a hotel in Dallas." Carter paused, staring at his hat. "I had my gun drawn. I was going to kill him. And he looked at me and said, 'Go ahead, boy, kill me. It will not bring your father back. It will not give you back your land. All it will do is make you a murderer.' And I realized he was right. Killing him would not fix anything. It would just make me like them." He looked up at Tessa, and she could see old pain in his eyes. "I put the gun away and walked out, but I felt like a failure, like I had let my father down by not avenging him. And I have carried that around with me ever since, the knowledge that I did not do what needed to be done." "But you did do what needed to be done," Tessa said softly. You chose not to become like them. That took more courage than pulling the trigger would have. Maybe, Carter said. Or maybe I was just a coward. But when I saw you behind that wagon, when I heard what you had done, I saw a chance to do something that actually mattered. To stop a man like Mallory legally, the right way. And maybe if I help you do that, I can finally let go of what happened to my father. Tessa crossed the small room and knelt in front of his chair, taking his hands in hers. They were warm and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard and asked for nothing in return. You are not a coward, Carter Jameson. You are the bravest man I have ever met. He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, something that made Tessa's breath catch in her throat. Tessa, he said, his voice rough, I need you to know something. When this is over, when Mallory is dealt with and you are safe, you can go anywhere you want. You will have your life back, but if you wanted to stay in Las Cruces, I would like that. I would like that a lot. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. Carter, I am damaged goods. You do not know the things I have done, the choices I have made. I lied. I stole. I have blood on my hands from the people Mallory hurt because I did not act sooner. I am not the kind of woman you should want around. Carter freed one of his hands and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. Then we are a perfect match, he said. So am I. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Tessa felt something settle into place inside her, something that had been broken and lost for so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be whole. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Carter leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Vincent Mallory had tried to force on her. This was a question, an offering, a promise all rolled into one. Tessa kissed him back, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, and felt something that might have been hope bloom in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Carter rested his forehead against hers. I am going to keep you safe, he said. Whatever it takes. I know, Tessa whispered. I trust you. It took 3 days for Marshal Tom Brady to arrive in Las Cruces, 3 days during which Carter barely left Tessa's side. He moved her from the boarding house to a room in the back of the doctor's office, figuring it was less obvious, and had a back door they could use if they needed to run. Dr. Samuel Morrison, a gruff man in his 60s with a shock of white hair, asked no questions and made it clear that anyone who tried to hurt one of his patients would have to get through him first. Carter slept on a cot in the front office, his gun always within reach. Tessa tried to tell him he did not need to guard her so closely, but he just gave her that small smile and said he slept better knowing she was safe. During the days, they talked about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother and the small apartment they had shared, about her love of numbers and books. He told her about Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about long days under the open sky and nights filled with stars. And slowly, in those quiet hours, Tessa felt herself falling in love with Carter Jameson. Not because he had saved her, though he had. Not because he was handsome, though he certainly was. But because he was good, genuinely good in a way that seemed rare in her experience. He cared about people, about doing the right thing, about justice and fairness and all the ideals that men like Vincent Mallory mocked. She thought Carter might be falling for her too, based on the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or brush a strand of hair from her face. But neither of them spoke about it directly, as if putting it into words might break whatever fragile thing was growing between them. Marshal Brady arrived on a Tuesday morning, riding into town on a dust-covered horse with saddlebags that looked like they had seen better days. He was a big man, well over 6 feet tall and broad through the shoulders, with a thick mustache and eyes that took in everything. Carter met him on the street, and Tessa watched from the window of Dr. Morrison's office as the two men shook hands and spoke in low voices. Then Carter brought the marshal back to meet her. Tom Brady looked her over with an assessing gaze that made Tessa want to squirm, but she held his stare until finally he nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "Carter says you have evidence against Vincent Mallory," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I need to see it." Tessa retrieved the ledgers from their hiding place under a loose floorboard in Dr. Morrison's office. There were 3 of them, leather-bound volumes filled with columns of numbers and notes in Vincent's distinctive handwriting. She handed them to Brady and watched as he paged through them, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good. Dates, amounts, names of everyone involved. With this, I can build a case that even Mallory's lawyers cannot wriggle out of. Miss Turner, you have done your country a service." "Will you prosecute?" Tessa asked, hardly daring to hope. "Absolutely," Brady said, "but I need to ask you something. Are you willing to testify? Because these ledgers are evidence, but having the bookkeeper who wrote them up explain what it all means would make the case even stronger." Tessa glanced at Carter, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Yes," she said, "I will testify." "Good." Brady closed the ledgers and tucked them into his saddlebag. "I will take these back to Santa Fe tonight, get them locked up somewhere safe. Then I will start the process of getting warrants issued. It may take a few months, but I promise you, Miss Turner, Vincent Mallory will face justice." A few months. Tessa could barely imagine it. A few months from now, this could all be over. She could be free. After Brady left, taking the ledgers with him, Tessa felt strangely deflated. She sat on the edge of the bed in her small room, staring at the floor and trying to process everything. Carter sat down beside her. "You all right?" "I do not know," Tessa admitted. "I have been running for so long, and now suddenly it is almost over. I do not know what to do with that." "Well," Carter said slowly, "you could start by thinking about what comes next. Where you want to be, what you want to do." "I want to stay here," Tessa said immediately. "In Las Cruces, if that is all right." Carter's face lit up in a way that made him look years younger. "That is more than all right. That is exactly what I was hoping you would say." "But I will need to find work," Tessa continued. "I cannot keep imposing on people's hospitality." "The general store is looking for a bookkeeper," Carter said. "Old Mr. Henderson's eyes are going, and he needs someone who can keep his accounts straight. I might have mentioned to him that I knew someone who was very good with numbers." Tessa turned to look at him. "You did?" "I might have," Carter said, grinning. "He said if you are interested, you can start next week." Without thinking, Tessa threw her arms around his neck and hugged him fiercely. Carter laughed and hugged her back, his arms strong and warm around her. When she pulled back, she was close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes, close enough to count the individual bristles of stubble on his jaw. "Tessa," he said softly, "I know this might not be the right time, but I need to tell you something." "What?" "I am falling in love with you," Carter said, the words coming out in a rush as if he was afraid he would lose his nerve if he did not say them quickly. "I know we have only known each other a couple of weeks, and I know you have been through hell, and I know I should probably give you time and space to figure out what you want, but I needed you to know. I am falling in love with you, and I think I started the minute I saw you behind that wagon, looking scared but determined not to show it." Tessa felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once they were happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And I think maybe I am a little bit terrified about it." "Me too," Carter admitted. "But I figure if we are terrified together, maybe it will not be so bad." Tessa laughed through her tears and kissed him, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This time it was a promise, a commitment, a leap of faith into something that felt dangerously like hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal after so many months of running. Tessa started working at Henderson's general store, and she quickly proved herself invaluable. The old man's books were a mess, years of haphazard record-keeping that made her fingers itch to organize. She threw herself into the work, creating new systems and tracking inventory with an efficiency that had Mr. Henderson singing her praises to anyone who would listen. The people of Las Cruces slowly accepted her as one of their own. Mrs. Gonzalez invited her to the weekly ladies' social. The doctor's wife asked her to help with the church bake sale. Even the rough cowboys who drank at the Silver Dollar tipped their hats respectfully when they saw her on the street. And through it all, Carter was there. He walked her to work in the mornings and home in the evenings, a constant presence that made her feel safer than she had in years. They had dinner together most nights, either at the boarding house or sometimes at the small house behind his office, where he would cook surprisingly good meals over his wood stove and tell her stories about his life that made her laugh until her sides hurt. It was domestic and ordinary, and everything Tessa had never let herself dream about, and she loved every minute of it. One evening in early October, after the worst of the summer heat had finally broken and the air had taken on a crisp quality that reminded Tessa of autumn back east, Carter took her for a walk along the banks of the Rio Grande. The river was low this time of year, just a trickle compared to the spring floods, but it was still beautiful in the fading light. They walked hand in hand, not talking, just enjoying being together. Finally, Carter stopped and turned to face her, and Tessa could see something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. "Tessa," he said, "I know we agreed to take this slow to give you time to heal from everything that happened. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right," Tessa said, her voice shaking slightly. "You think you could be happy here, in Las Cruces with me for the long term?" "Yes," Tessa said without hesitation. "I already am happy here. Happier than I have ever been." Carter smiled, that full, brilliant smile that transformed his whole face. "Good, because I want to marry you, Tessa Turner. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you if you want them, grow old with you. I know it is fast, and I know you might want more time, but I am 31 years old and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. So I am asking, even though I know I probably should wait. Will you marry me?" Tessa looked at him, this good, brave, wonderful man who had given her back her life and her hope and her ability to trust. And she thought about all the reasons she should say no, should wait, should be sensible. But then she thought about what he had said to her that day in her room, about both of them being damaged goods, about being a perfect match. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear and certain across the twilight. "Yes, Carter, I will marry you." Carter whooped and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her toes curl in her boots. And Tessa kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. They were married 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning with the whole town in attendance. Tessa wore a dress that Mrs. Gonzalez and the other ladies had helped her make, a simple but beautiful creation in cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Carter wore his best suit, and Tessa thought she had never seen a more handsome man. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of town, with Reverend Thomas officiating. Dr. Morrison gave Tessa away, since she had no family of her own, and Deputy Martinez stood up as Carter's best man. Mrs. Gonzalez cried happy tears through the whole thing, And even gruff old Mr. Henderson was seen dabbing at his eyes with his handkerchief. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Carter kissed Tessa in front of God and everyone, and the church erupted in cheers and applause. Tessa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held at the Silver Dollar, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than Tessa had seen in one place since she left Boston. People came up to congratulate them, to wish them well, to tell Carter he was a lucky man and Tessa that she had made a good choice. But the best moment came late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and it was just Tessa and Carter and a handful of close friends sitting around talking. Tom Brady, who had made the trip from Santa Fe for the wedding, raised his glass and said, "To Carter and Tessa Jameson. May your life together be long and happy. Tessa Jameson." She was Tessa Jameson now, no longer Tessa Turner, no longer the frightened woman on the run. She was a wife, a member of this community, a woman with a future instead of just a past. Carter must have seen something in her expression because he leaned over and whispered in her ear. "You all right, Mrs. Jameson?" "I am perfect," Tessa whispered back. "Absolutely perfect." They spent their wedding night in Carter's house, which was now her house too. It was strange and wonderful to lie in Carter's arms in his bed and know that this was real, that this was forever. He was gentle with her, mindful of her inexperience and her past trauma, and when they came together, it felt like the final piece of her broken heart clicking back into place. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Carter traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder and said, "I love you, Tessa Jameson." "I love you too," Tessa said, and she had never meant anything more in her life. The weeks turned into months, and Tessa settled into married life with a contentment she had never imagined possible. She continued working at the general store, and Carter continued his duties as sheriff, and together they built a life that felt solid and real and safe. News came from Tom Brady in January that the warrants for Vincent Mallory's arrest had been issued. By February, Brady wrote to say that Mallory had been arrested in Boston and was awaiting trial. Tessa would need to return east to testify, but Brady assured them that Mallory was being held without bail and that she would be under federal protection the entire time. In March, Tessa and Carter made the long journey back to Boston. It was strange to see the city again after almost a year away. The streets seemed narrower, the buildings more oppressive. Tessa found herself clinging to Carter's hand, grateful for his solid presence beside her. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and Tessa spent 3 days on the witness stand explaining the ledgers, identifying transactions, and describing Mallory's illegal activities. It was exhausting and nerve-wracking, but every time she felt her courage falter, she would look at Carter sitting in the gallery and draw strength from his steady gaze. Vincent Mallory was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, extortion, and bribery. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. As the bailiffs led him away, he turned to look at Tessa, and she saw nothing in his eyes but cold hatred. But she did not flinch, did not look away. She stared back until he was gone, and then she let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a year. It was over. Finally, truly over. They returned to Las Cruces in early April, just as the desert was beginning to bloom with spring wildflowers. The whole town turned out to welcome them home, and Tessa felt overwhelmed by the warmth and affection of these people who had accepted her as one of their own. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a frontier town. Carter dealt with the usual problems of drunken cowboys and petty theft. Tessa kept the books at the general store and started helping Dr. Morrison with his accounts as well. They went to church on Sundays, and to the social dances on Saturday nights. They had dinner with Tom Brady when he passed through town on his rounds, and in late summer, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She told Carter one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully as he processed the news. For a moment he just stared at her, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his face. "A baby," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "A baby," Tessa confirmed, her own smile matching his. Carter stood up so fast his chair fell over, and then he was around the table and picking her up, hugging her tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, laughing. "Tessa, we are going to have a baby." Tessa laughed too, happy tears streaming down her face. "We are," she agreed. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1884, coming into the world with a lusty cry that suggested he was going to be every bit as strong-willed as his parents. They named him Thomas Carter Jameson, after Tom Brady and his father, and from the moment Tessa held him in her arms, she knew that her heart would never be entirely her own again. Carter was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. Tessa would often come home from work to find them both asleep in the rocking chair, Tommy tucked against Carter's chest, and her heart would swell with so much love she thought it might burst. Life continued to be good to them. Carter was re-elected sheriff multiple times, becoming such a fixture in Las Cruces that people could not imagine the town without him. Tessa eventually bought the general store from Mr. Henderson when he decided to retire, and under her management, it became the most successful business in town. They had 3 more children over the years. A daughter named Elizabeth who had Carter's pale eyes and Tessa's head for numbers. Another son named James who was quiet and thoughtful. And finally, another daughter named Sarah who was a wild child from the day she was born and kept them all on their toes. Tessa never forgot where she came from or what she had endured to get to this place of happiness. But she also never let it define her. She was not the frightened woman who had crouched behind a wagon anymore. She was Tessa Jameson, wife, mother, businesswoman, and pillar of the Las Cruces community. On their 10th anniversary, Carter took her back to the spot on the Rio Grande where he had proposed. The river was running high with spring melt, and the cottonwood trees were just beginning to leaf out, their branches soft with new growth. "You ever regret it?" Carter asked, taking her hand as they stood watching the water flow past. "Staying here, marrying me, building this life?" Tessa turned to look at him, at the man she loved more with each passing year. There was gray at his temples now and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once, not for a single moment." "You saved my life, Carter Jameson. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "You saved mine too," Carter said softly. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, doing my job but not really living. You taught me that it is okay to let people in, to trust, to love. You taught me that being damaged does not mean being broken beyond repair." Tessa smiled and leaned up to kiss him, tasting the familiar warmth of his lips, feeling the solid strength of his arms coming around her. "We saved each other," she said when they finally pulled apart. "We are a perfect match, remember, perfect match," Carter agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way she loved. Then and now and always. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the river flow endlessly toward the sea. And Tessa thought about all the rivers she had crossed, all the miles she had traveled, all the fear and pain and uncertainty that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. She thought about the girl she had been in Boston, naive and trusting and so easily hurt. She thought about the woman she had become during those months of running, hardened and suspicious and afraid. And she thought about the woman she was now, happy and secure and surrounded by love. It had been a long journey, full of pain and danger and moments when she had not been sure she would survive. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. And she had found something along the way that she had never expected to find. A home, a family, and a love that would last the rest of her days. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. Tommy grew into a serious young man who decided to follow in his father's footsteps and become a lawman. Elizabeth married a schoolteacher from Santa Fe and gave Tessa and Carter their first grandchild. James discovered a talent for carpentry and opened a furniture shop in town. And Sarah, true to form, announced at 16 that she was going to become a doctor and would not be dissuaded no matter how many people told her that medicine was not a proper career for a woman. Carter finally retired as sheriff at the age of 55, turning his badge over to his son with pride and a few tears that he tried to hide. He spent his retirement helping Tessa run the store, playing with his growing number of grandchildren, and sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the mountains. Tessa had never been happier. Her business was thriving, her children were healthy and successful, and she still fell asleep every night in the arms of the man she loved. Sometimes she would lie awake and think about how different her life could have been if Carter had not stepped out of that sheriff's office on that hot September day. Where would she be now? Dead in a ditch somewhere, probably, or still running, still afraid, still alone. But Carter had stepped out. He had chosen to help her when he had no reason to do so. He had protected her, believed in her, and loved her even when she had not believed she deserved to be loved. And in doing so, he had given her the most precious gift possible, a second chance. On the evening of their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the Silver Dollar. The whole town turned out, just as they had for the wedding, and Tessa was overwhelmed by the warmth and affection of all these people who had become her family over the years. Tom Brady, now retired himself and living in Santa Fe with his wife, made the trip to attend. He raised his glass in a toast and said, "25 years ago, Carter Jameson sent me a telegram asking for help with a dangerous fugitive." What he did not mention was that the fugitive was a beautiful woman who would steal his heart. Here is to Carter and Tessa, who proved that even damaged goods can shine like new when they find the right match. Everyone cheered, and Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. Carter squeezed her hand under the table, and when she looked at him, she saw that his eyes were bright with emotion too. Later, after most of the guests had gone home and they were walking back to their house hand in hand under a sky full of stars, Carter said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I told you I wanted you to stay?" "I said I was damaged goods," Tessa replied, the memory still painful even after all these years. "And I said we were a perfect match," Carter finished. "That I was damaged too. Do you think that is still true, after everything, after all these years?" Tessa thought about it for a moment. "I think we will always carry our scars," she said slowly. "But I also think that those scars made us who we are. They taught us compassion and strength and the value of second chances. So yes, I think we are still a perfect match, maybe even more so now than we were then." Carter stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you, Tessa Jameson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Tessa said, her arms coming up to encircle his neck. "You are my hero, Carter. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me right back," Carter said. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a man doing a job. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living." They kissed under the stars, and Tessa thought about how far they had come from that hot September day when bullets had been flying and fear had been a living thing in her chest. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting, something that would outlive them both in the form of their children and grandchildren. The years continued their relentless march forward, bringing both joy and sorrow. Tessa's business continued to thrive well into her 60s, though she eventually turned the day-to-day management over to Elizabeth's eldest daughter, a sharp young woman with Tessa's head for numbers and Carter's steady temperament. Dr. Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, and the whole town mourned the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. Tommy became sheriff of Las Cruces, then eventually a U.S. Marshal like his namesake Tom Brady. James's furniture became so renowned that people traveled from as far as Santa Fe and Albuquerque to commission pieces. And Sarah, defying all expectations and conventions, graduated from medical school and returned to Las Cruces to take over Dr. Morrison's practice. Tessa and Carter spent their later years surrounded by children and grandchildren, their small house always full of noise and laughter and life. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, Carter in his rocking chair and Tessa in hers, holding hands and watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. "You think we did all right?" Carter asked one evening when he was in his early 70s. His dark hair had gone completely white, and he moved slower than he used to, but his pale eyes were still as sharp and clear as they had been the day they met. "What do you mean?" Tessa asked, though she thought she knew, with everything, with raising the children, with building this life. "Do you think we did all right?" Tessa looked at him, at this man who had been her partner and her love for more than 40 years. "I think we did better than all right," she said. "I think we did something extraordinary. We took two broken people and made something whole. We built a family and a legacy that will go on long after we are gone. We loved each other through good times and bad, through hardship and joy, and we never gave up. So yes, Carter, I think we did all right." Carter smiled, that full, beautiful smile that she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Good," he said. "That is what I think too." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one. And Tessa thought about the journey that had brought her to this place, to this moment, to this profound sense of peace and contentment. She had started out as a frightened woman on the run, convinced that her past had ruined any chance she might have at happiness. But Carter had shown her that the past did not have to define the future. He had shown her that being damaged was not the same as being worthless, that scars could heal even if they never entirely disappeared, and that love could grow in the most unlikely places. She had been damaged goods. Carter had been damaged too, but together they had been perfect. They had been exactly what each other needed, and they had built a love story for the ages. Carter Jameson passed away peacefully in his sleep on a warm June night, 3 months after his 75th birthday. Tessa was lying beside him when it happened, and she woke to find him still and cold in the pre-dawn darkness. For a long moment, she just lay there, holding his hand, feeling the absence of the vital presence that had been the center of her world for more than 40 years. Then she got up, pressed a kiss to his forehead, and went to wake their children. There would be time for grief later. Right now, there were arrangements to be made. The funeral was the largest Las Cruces had ever seen. People came from all over New Mexico, and even from Texas, to pay their respects to the man who had been a pillar of his community for half a century. Tommy gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about his father's strength, his integrity, his unwavering commitment to justice and fairness. Tessa sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and listened to the stories people told about Carter, about the times he had helped them, protected them, stood up for them, about his kindness and his humor and his absolute refusal to back down when he believed in something. And she realized that he had left an impact that would echo through generations. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home and it was just Tessa alone in the house that suddenly seemed much too large and too quiet, she sat in Carter's rocking chair on the porch and let herself cry. She cried for the man she had loved, for the life they had built together, for all the tomorrows they would never have. She cried until she had no tears left, until the desert night had wrapped around her like a blanket and the stars were bright overhead. And then, exhausted and empty, she went to bed in the room they had shared for more than 4 decades. But she could not bring herself to sleep on her side of the bed. Instead, she lay on Carter's side, breathing in the faint scent of him that still clung to the pillow, and finally fell into a dreamless sleep. The months after Carter's death were the hardest of Tessa's life. She had faced danger and loss before, but nothing compared to the hollow ache of losing her partner, her best friend, her other half. There were days when she did not want to get out of bed, when the effort of facing a world without Carter in it seemed too much to bear. But she had children who needed her, grandchildren who wanted to hear stories about their grandfather, a community that still looked to her for strength and leadership. So she got up every morning, put on her clothes, and faced the day. Because that was what Carter would have done. That was what he had taught her to do all those years ago. Keep going, even when it seemed impossible. Slowly, painfully, Tessa learned to live with the loss. She found comfort in her family, in the routine of work at the store, in the memories of all the years they had shared. She would sit on the porch in the evenings and talk to Carter as if he were still sitting beside her, telling him about her day, about the grandchildren's latest adventures, about all the small things that made up a life. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she could almost believe he was there, listening, loving her still. Tessa lived for another 12 years after Carter's death, years filled with the joy of watching her grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. She lived long enough to see Tommy retire from the U.S. Marshals with honor, to attend James's 50th wedding anniversary, to watch Sarah train the next generation of doctors. She lived long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild, a baby girl with Carter's pale eyes. And on a cool autumn evening, surrounded by her family in the house she had shared with Carter for so many years, Tessa Turner Jameson closed her eyes for the last time. She was 88 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life beyond anything she could have imagined in those dark days when she had been running from her past. Her last conscious thought was of Carter, of the day he had stepped out of the sheriff's office and changed her life forever. She smiled, feeling his presence close, and thought, "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They buried her next to Carter in the Las Cruces cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that provided shade even in the hottest months. The tombstone was simple, just their names and dates, but someone had added an inscription that seemed to capture everything they had been to each other. 2 damaged souls who made each other whole. And if you visit Las Cruces today, more than a century later, you can still hear stories about Sheriff Carter Jameson and his wife Tessa, about the love story that began with bullets flying and a woman on the run, and ended with a legacy that shaped a town and touched countless lives. People still talk about how Carter had saved Tessa, and how she had saved him right back, and how together they had proved that even the most broken things can be mended with patience and love, and the courage to believe in second chances. Their descendants still live in Las Cruces, proud to carry the blood of 2 people who had been brave enough to look at each other's scars and say, "We are a perfect match." And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the desert, some say you can still feel their presence. Two souls joined forever by a love that transcended time and circumstance, and all the obstacles the world had thrown in their path. It was a love born in violence and fear, but it grew into something beautiful and enduring. It was a love between two people who had every reason to give up on happiness, but who chose to fight for it instead. It was a love that proved that damaged goods could be more precious than anything perfect, because they carried with them the strength of survival and the wisdom of experience. And it all started on a hot September day in 1882, when a cowboy looked at a frightened woman and decided she was worth protecting, worth believing in, worth loving. When he looked at her and saw not her past, but her future. When he looked at her and recognized a kindred spirit, another wounded soul searching for home, she had said she was damaged goods. He had replied that they were a perfect match, that he was damaged too. And in those simple words, he had given her permission to be human, to be flawed, to be herself. He had given her hope when she had none, and love when she had not believed she deserved it, and she had given him the same in return. She had shown him that opening your heart again after loss was worth the risk. She had shown him that love did not make you weak, it made you stronger. She had shown him that the best things in life often came from the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply choosing to trust again. Together, Carter Jameson and Tessa Turner had built something that would outlast them both. They had built a family, a legacy, and a love story that would be told and retold for generations. They had proved that happy endings were not just the stuff of fairy tales, but something real that could be achieved by ordinary people who were willing to fight for them. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Not that they had escaped their pasts or overcome their damage, but that they had learned to carry their scars with pride. Not that they had been perfect, but that they had been perfect for each other. Not that they had lived without fear or pain or sorrow, but that they had faced all those things together and emerged stronger on the other side. She had been damaged goods. He had been damaged too. But together, they had been whole, complete, exactly what the other needed. They had been, in every way that mattered, a perfect match. And that, in the end, was all that anyone could ask for. Someone to love who loved them back. Someone to stand beside through good times and bad. Someone who looked at all their broken pieces and said, "I will help you put those back together, if you will help me with mine." That was what Carter had given Tessa on that hot September day in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And that was what she had given him in return. Not perfection, but partnership. Not a life without scars, but a life where scars were honored as proof of survival. Not an escape from the past, but a future built on the lessons the past had taught. They had been two damaged people who found each other at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place. And from that chance meeting, they had built something extraordinary. Something that would echo through time long after they were gone. A testament to the power of love to heal, to transform, to make whole what had been broken. The story of Carter Jameson and Tessa Turner was a love story for the ages. It was proof that happy endings existed, even for those who thought they did not deserve them. It was proof that second chances were real, that redemption was possible, that love could conquer even the darkest pasts. And it all started with a simple truth, spoken by a cowboy to a frightened woman behind an overturned wagon. "Then we are a perfect match. So am I." 5 simple words that changed 2 lives forever. 5 simple words that became the foundation of a love that would last beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything the world could throw at it. She said she was damaged goods. He said they were a perfect match. And together, They proved that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most broken places, and that love, real love, sees not our flaws but our potential, not our past but our future, not what we have lost but what we can still become. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world. And that was why, more than a century later, people still told their story and marveled at the power of two damaged souls finding each other and making something whole.